It would be fair to say that as time has passed and antisocial behaviour has become increasingly prevalent, that people are less likely to get involved or challenge people's behaviour. But it does still happen, albeit with increasing scarcity. But for those of us who abhor injustice in all its forms, when we see reports of such challenges happening, we give an inner cheer for the fact that there is still goodness and a sense of righteousness in the world. But as we know all too well these days, it is not without its risks. Certainly in a world that has come to dismiss the rights of others and dismiss consequences generally. Today's case sees this in action, where a family man with 3 daughters and who had overcome invasive surgery to beat cancer challenged antisocial behaviour directed at his family's property and got viciously attacked for trying to stand up for the rights he should have been able to take for granted. This is the devastating murder of Garry Newlove in 2007, and this is Murder of Crows. Garry Newlove was born in Salford on the 5th of November 1959 to parents Thomas and Ellen, where he was the youngest of 3 children. When he was 23, he was thunderstruck by love at first sight when he saw Helen Marston in a nightclub. And after being together for over 3 years, the two got married in 1986. Money was always tight, so the couple honeymooned in a caravan in Wales. No better location, in my humble opinion. And they continued to work hard as they planned a family. Garry was a sales manager in a local plastics company, while Helen was a legal PA. And their ultimate, very reasonable aim was to be able to own their own family home. Trouble came calling for Garry in 1992 when he received a diagnosis of stomach cancer and underwent a 5-hour operation to remove his stomach and spleen, following which he was in intensive care for 3 days. The illness and surgery resulted, according to Helen at least, to Garry looking like a little old man. But through hard work and determination, Garry recovered and incredibly was back at work within 6 months. The following years were filled with family love and a renewed respect for and enjoyment of life, as well as plenty of hard work. By 2004, the couple had 3 daughters, Zoe, Danielle and Amy. And they were able to buy a 4-bedroom detached property in Padgate near Warrington. They were drawn to the area as it still had a village feel while being close to the larger urban areas. As Helen later reflected, "It's a little old village actually. Fernhead and Padgate are very old villages, so they still have that quaint look about them. What I really liked more importantly was the old-fashioned neighbours who had time to say hello." So it was a place that had retained its sense of community, and it certainly seemed suited for young families. But like many places near to more urban areas, it had a growing level of antisocial behaviour, and this only increased with time. One particular concern for the family was a subway that was accessed at the end of their road. This subway area seemed, as many such areas do, to attract young people who liked to congregate in the area that was a bit more out of the public eye. And as time went on, there was more and more evidence for this particular area being used for underage drinking and drug use. And rather unsurprisingly, there was an increase in aggressive and violent behaviour and incidents alongside this. In fact, at that time, Helen was attending residents and police meetings to raise her concerns. The police did nothing proactive and just advised people to keep notes of any criminal damage. They still did nothing even when a gang of youths banged on the windows of that very meeting place. In an ominous case of foreshadowing, Helen actually told a neighbour that it would take a murder for the police to actually do anything. In early 2007, the Newlove family were planning an upcoming foreign holiday. It was bittersweet as their oldest daughter was now 18. So it could have been the last time they had a holiday as a whole family. But also in 2007, their weekends were plagued with aggressive teenagers causing trouble. And it had started impacting on the family directly. When Garry asked a lad to stop urinating on a fence, he'd been told to fuck off. Another time, Garry asked some other lads to get off a car bonnet, and they responded by saying, "Fuck off, you specky-eyed fucker. Get in the house or we'll come and shag your wife." Cars in the street were often damaged at night, and in fact their family car had been vandalised 4 times. Garry was so concerned about the increase in antisocial behaviour that he stopped his children going to the local shops after dark. Ominously, at the end of July, a man who had been trying to defend his property had been attacked by a gang of youths. On Friday the 10th of August 2007, the Newlove family were not concerned with the outside world. Garry and his two younger daughters were looking forward to the final of a TV talent show that evening. Helen didn't really fancy that, and she was feeling a little under the weather, but rather than ruin the mood, she said she would go up to bed and watch one of her own favourite shows that was due to start later that evening, leaving the lounge to Garry and the girls to enjoy their show. Unknown to the Newlove family, elsewhere in Padgate, alcohol was fueling a gang mood of entitlement and aggression that was becoming a powder keg ready to blow. In a local park, a group of youths were drinking cans of strong lager and showing no signs of slowing down their drinking. And on the contrary, despite their ages, they went to an off-licence to get large bottles of strong cider. This gang are celebrating one of their number, an 18-year-old called Adam Swellings, obviously nicknamed Swellhead. He had been released on police bail at midday that day, and fueled by their cheap but potent alcohol, the youths became increasingly rowdy and started causing trouble in back alleys and streets. They were challenged by a community support officer who confiscated their alcohol and sent them on their way. Rather than see this as a natural end to their evening, the gang just went to get more alcohol. And as a result, their behaviour got more aggressive, with a teenager and, more sickeningly, a disabled boy being attacked in the street. Things were clearly reaching a boiling point. Back at the Newlove home, evening was wearing on, and Garry has taken his wife a boiled egg to have in bed before returning to his daughters in the lounge. Helen's show was due to start soon, and she was ready to watch it. But by about 10:40, Swellhead and his gang entered Garry's street and broke a light on one of their neighbours' cars. Then one of the gang kicked Helen's car, and the sound of breaking glass was heard inside the Newlove home. And Helen called down to ask Garry to find out what was going on. And Garry replied with, "Yep, not a problem, I'll just go and check." Helen didn't know this, but these would be the last words her beloved and devoted husband would ever say to her. Garry went out and demanded to know which one of the gang had damaged his wife's Renault Scenic. The gang laughed at him and circled around him, shouting and swearing and goading him. One of the gang, Adam Swellings, came up from behind and was the first one to punch Garry. Once that line had been crossed, the rest of the youths attacked like a pack. Garry was kneed in the back and fell to his knees, making him the right height for them to kick him in the head. At this time, Zoe Newlove returns home from work at IKEA with her boyfriend. They tried to intervene, but nothing was going to stop this gang being driven by bloodlust. There was nothing Amy or Danielle could do. They could only watch in horror as each of the 14 blows to Garry's head was inflicted. Garry had instinctively pulled himself into a fetal position. One of the gang kicked Garry so hard in the head that he lost his trainer beneath the beaten body. In all, Garry received 40 different injuries, with his hands being bruised from trying to protect himself. They do not stop kicking Garry, even while he was lying on the ground, dying from his injuries. In just 2 minutes, Garry had been seriously injured. But as Garry was not reacting any longer, the gang moved on and went straight to a chip shop for their dinner. Zoe's boyfriend attempted CPR on Garry, and his daughters were desperately looking for signs that Garry was going to recover. First responders arrived soon after, and they soon got Garry into an ambulance. Helen tried to get into the ambulance with them, but Garry crashes and needed immediate life-saving measures, so she was asked to leave the ambulance. After a brief time hysterically calling family on the phone, Helen went to the hospital, where the staff explained that Garry was in a coma. Helen still wanted to see him, and it was an image that is burned into her brain to this day, with her reflecting, "It was horrible. You see the neck collar, but his head was so swollen. It made me feel physically sick. I still say to this day that there was a footprint on his forehead that was a footprint of a trainer." A violent kick to the back of Garry's head had caused a brain hemorrhage. Amy wrote a letter to her father begging him to come back to her, where she wrote, "I know you can fight this, as you are a strong, loving man. I will stick by you while you are in hospital, and I will take care of Mummy." Helen took her daughters to see their father, because if he was to die, she didn't want their last memory to be of their father broken and bleeding on a dirty floor. They all kissed, cuddled and hugged him, and the family held a bedside vigil. But after 2 days, Helen was told that Garry was brain dead, and she made the heart-wrenching decision to switch off life support. Following a 2-minute savaged, unprovoked attack 2 days earlier, Garry Newlove was dead. The police response was rapid, as they began approaching kids who were drunk and drugged up on that Friday night. 2 police community support officers had noticed one lad, 16-year-old Stephen Sorton, was missing a trainer when they stopped him. He'd lied and said it had come off while running. As a result, he was soon arrested. Methodical, painstaking detective work alongside several eyewitness statements identified other key members of the gang. Witnesses all agreed that there were around 4 or 5 main youths involved in the attack. Within hours, 9 were in custody, but 3 names kept coming up in witness accounts, and all were known for either drinking or drug taking and for disturbances in the local neighbourhood. They were Stephen Sorton, Adam Swellings, the aforementioned Swellhead, and Jordan Cunliffe, who was just 15 years old at the time. After the attack on Garry, Swellings had gone home and admitted to his mother that he'd beaten a man up. And in fairness to her, she called the police. Swellings was at his father's home in Crewe when the police came. And when they did come, they got the impression that Swellings wasn't really bothered about what had taken place. When the case progressed to trial, which began at Chester Crown Court on the 14th of November 2007, the youths continued their entitled and self-absorbed behaviour. As Garry Newlove's daughters gave harrowing evidence, including Zoe Newlove describing how her father's head was kicked like a football, the youths, one of whom was allowed to have his mother with him as he was underage, the youths giggled, fidgeted and sniggered throughout the proceedings and had the audacity to say that it was Garry Newlove who was the aggressor. On the 2nd of January 2008, the jury retired to consider their verdict. They deliberated for 55 hours, and the police were very worried given the length of time that the deliberations were going on for. But after what amounted to 10 days of waiting, 3 of the teenagers were found guilty of murder, while 2 others were cleared. Swellings and Sorton were emotionless on hearing the verdict, but now 17-year-old Jordan Cunliffe, who was the worst offender for disrupting court proceedings with jokes and giggling, at that point he burst into tears and wailed. Adam Swellings was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 17 years. Stephen Sorton was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 15 years, and Jordan Cunliffe was given a minimum term of 12 years.
Have-a-go hero Garry Newlove paid the ultimate price when he tried to stop Yobs smashing up his wife's car outside his home in Warrington. The 47-year-old, who grew up in Odsall in Salford, went out to confront the 5 teenagers who'd all been drinking, but he was beaten up. His 12-year-old daughter saw it happen. He died from a brain hemorrhage. After a 5-week trial and nearly 10 days of consideration, the jury here at Chester Crown Court found 3 of the 5 teenagers accused of murder guilty. Adam Swellings, who's 19 and from Crewe, Stephen Sorton, who's 17 and from Warrington, and Jordan Cunliffe, who's 16 and formerly from Warrington, were all found guilty of murder. The other 2 defendants were cleared of all charges. The boys all broke down in tears in the dock. Swellings was on bail when he murdered Mr. Newlove. He had been banned from Warrington as part of his bail conditions. Mr. Newlove was married with 3 daughters. He was killed on August the 10th last year. He was a co-director for Duckingfield-based CF Airflow, a ventilation equipment supplier, and a sales manager for George Fisher, a plastics firm.
The light has gone out of our lives. It's like a piece of our jigsaw has been lost forever. The tiniest of things that we used to do as a family feels like it takes us forever to achieve them. We all sit at home, the girls and I, and wait for Garry to walk through the door.
CCTV taken from a neighbour's house was shown to the jury. It did not show the attack, but the defendants were identified on it near Mr. Newlove's house in the Fernhead area of Warrington, which had been plagued by antisocial behaviour.
As far as I'm concerned, Life should mean life. After all, the tariff for murder is mandatory. But why, as the justice system does not uphold this sentence? There should be no lesser tariff, otherwise what is the point of it being mandatory?
As Mrs. Newlove said, the sentence for murder is mandatory. Life. The judge, Andrew Smith, will give his recommendation for a minimum term spent in jail at a later date. This case raises a lot of questions about how the police deal with antisocial behaviour, but perhaps one lasting legacy is that we'll all now remember what happened to Mr. Newlove, and that will make us more reluctant to tackle yobs ourselves in the future. Richard Butt, Channel M News.
A street like many others, yards away from a family home. Seen here on a neighbour's CCTV, the victim, Garry Newlove, confronting youths who had vandalised the family car moments before the group attacked, an attack which led to his death. Speaking for the first time on television, his 3 daughters describe their still vivid memories.
One guy hit my dad, and then they all started hitting my dad. So, yeah, kind of all happened so fast.
He was just full in blood and his head was just smashed up. I've never seen. I couldn't even think of how people could even do that to my dad. He's just unbelievable.
Left in a coma following the attack in Warrington, Garry Newlove's wife watched as his life support machine was switched off. Now Baroness Newlove, she continues to campaign against antisocial behaviour. The 3 teens responsible sentenced to life for the attack. Their victim's family left with the consequences forever.
It's lonely now. I mean, not lonely fully, because I obviously have my mum, my sisters and my other relatives, but because Dad was a big part of me, now it seems part of me's gone too.
All 3 appealed their sentences, and while Swellings and Cunliffe had their appeals rejected, Saughton saw his minimum term reduced from 15 years to 13 years. After a couple of years of campaigning, in 2010 Helen was invited to become a peer in the House of Lords, acting on behalf of victims and communities.
Our trustee and well-beloved Helen Margaret Newlove, to the state degree, style, dignity, title and honour of Baroness Newlove of Warrington in our county of Cheshire. And for us, our heirs and successors, do appoint, give and grant unto her the said name, state, degree, style, dignity, title and honour of Baroness Newlove, to have and to hold unto her for her life. Willing and by these presents granting for us, our heirs and successors, that she may have, hold and possess a seat, place and voice in the parliaments and public assemblies and councils of us, our heirs and successors within our united kingdom amongst the barons.
I, Helen, Baroness Newlove, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
The core root of all this is my husband was murdered, so I don't think I'm any different than anybody, and that's how I've always been. But the fact that when you go through such a thing as we have, Garry's murder, and actually the processes that go out there, they can either break you totally, or you can actually be more proactive and actually say, no, we need to do changes. And I think the more that we do that, the more that we'll have a voice. So after 10 weeks and seeing 3 girls, Mum could either lie in bed and not function at all, or Mum could get up and do something so that the girls will actually function and do something. So that's all I intended to do, was go out there and raise awareness of antisocial behaviour, of gangs, communities falling apart, and to make sure, you know, it can to make sure get very complacent in everything, that it can happen to anybody, anywhere, at any time, to be honest. So that's what my agenda's always been, to work with the youth offending teams, to go in there Nothing's 100% guaranteed, and people have said, well, you know, why bother? Nobody's going to listen to you. But if you don't try, you never know. And obviously then I've worked with the charity Through Unity in London, who are similar families going through the same, and some of them can't get out of bed, they can't speak, they can't function. And when you see families like that, that makes me more proactive and say, no, you know, I will help them all I can, and that's what I do today.
But like Doreen Lawrence, Helen was made for this role. In the years since becoming the Victims Commissioner, she toured the country meeting others who were trying to tackle antisocial behaviour. She also met with youth offenders and performed talks at schools about the dangers of alcohol abuse. She later reflected, I do what I do because I really can't get my head round the fact that he's gone. I can't get my head round that he had cancer but didn't die from cancer. He died from kicks to the head. I do what I do because I don't want to live in a society that accepts that kind of crime. In 2012, in a small ceremony surrounded by her 3 daughters, Helen remarried. This case caused massive public outrage, especially as several other high-profile cases happened around the same time, like those of Sophie Lancaster, Rhys Jones and Ben Kinsella. And they were also crimes committed by teenagers. It is time for parents to resume control over their offspring, the Assistant Chief Constable of Cheshire Police, Garry said. And he also believed that society saw the Newlove case as a tipping point where we all have to take action against antisocial behaviour. But despite the outcry, little in practice appears to have changed. In December of 2019, the Parole Board recommended that Jordan Cunliffe should be released from prison. But on the 14th of May 2020, it was reported that Cunliffe had been denied parole following reports that he had held an alcohol-fueled party in his prison cell at an open prison to celebrate his impending release. As a result, and pending further consideration, he was returned to closed conditions in another prison. But Cunliffe was eventually paroled in September of 2020. This decision was challenged by the Secretary of State, but that challenge was dismissed on the 23rd of October 2020. In February of 2020, the Parole Board also recommended that Stephen Sorton should be released from prison. He is believed to have been paroled the following month. In April of 2022, the Parole Board recommended that Adam Swellings, who was thought to have been the gang's ringleader, they recommended that he be moved to an open prison with day release provisions. But that move was blocked by Justice Secretary Dominic Raab. So that was the sorry tale of a man beaten to the verge of death in just 2 minutes for challenging the actions of some pissed up youths. An extreme case, but perhaps a tragic reminder that young people need to take responsibility for their actions and maybe, just maybe, show the respect to others that is readily offered to them. A big-hearted family man who had survived cancer was savagely beaten to death for trying to stop some kids doing just what they wanted to do. This video is of course dedicated to Garry Newlove, with special mention for the efforts of Helen Newlove in trying to change the system to reflect the rights of victims. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Don't forget, I will be going to CrimeCon Glasgow at the end of April. There should be something coming up on the screen now, should you wish to attend, and it also includes my discount code of Crows if you want to get 10% off. And if you do come along, I will see you there and make sure that you come and say hello. But with that said, I'm Steve. This is my Lord and Master Samson. And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that